This book changes everything. Hello everyone, welcome to another video. This is a very special video because I'm making a book review about Entitled. Entitled was published not too long ago, but already got to the bestseller position and is causing ripples all over not only Britain, but the royal family as well. Now, I'm a monarchist and I've been a royalist for at least 10 years, which means that for a decade I have studied members of royal families of Europe as a hobby. And the fact I happen to live quite near Balmoral also makes the royal family something very relevant in my life. As a matter of fact, around the time that this book was being published, senior members of the royal family were in Balmoral, as they usually are for Highland Games, but other members of the royal family came over flying by helicopter, and we managed to see here their helicopters landing towards Balmoral. And the speculation is they're all gathering together to discuss the impact of this book. As of now, it is quite obvious that this book has had a huge impact because Andrew and Fergie had now to give away their titles as Duke and Duchess of York. Now, there have been explosive books about members of the royal family in the past. One great example is this one, Diana by Andrew Morton, published in 1992. But the difference between this book and this book is that this one was mostly about marriage problems, while this one exposes things that have very much to do with the British public, such as the inadequate use of taxpayer money to finance unnecessary luxuries by Andrew and Fergie. As a historian myself, just now starting my career, I actually got the privilege to meet with Andrew Loney in London a couple months ago, and we not only spoke about Entitled, but we also spoke about the release of my PhD.
Thank you. Very nice to meet. Very nice to meet someone else who's also challenging royal accountability and transparency. Then, it's very exciting for me. So I look forward to seeing you, the product of your research too, which looks very interesting.
And one of the most important things that Andrew Loney exposes in this book, something very crucial for historians, especially in Britain, is the fact that the Foreign Office refused and ignored his request for the release of files. I myself worked with files from the Foreign Office for my PhD, looking at over 11,000 pages of documents. And I also had some files that were withheld by the Foreign Office without any explanation. This is a problem because as we have the Freedoms of Information Act, we should expect that the British public should be allowed to access documents that are of their interest. It's a great thing that Andrew is campaigning for this with this book as well. Why is this book so important? Besides the obvious reasons I have spoken here already, let me tell you the two kinds of books that exist about members of the royal family and why this book does not fit anywhere in these categories. Here I can illustrate a little bit better what I mean about these two categories of royal biographic books. To the left, we have books that show a positive image of a specific member. They could be written either by themselves, as we have here an example with Sarah Ferguson, My Story. And we also have another example, quite good here, is the memoir written by Edward VIII. Or we can have books that are written by an authorized historian, as we have the case of this one about the Queen Elizabeth. And we have this one, which is one of my favorites, about Charles III. Of course, Diana's book, we know, was written by Andrew Morton, but we are now aware that he was an authorized speaker for this work because she recorded on tapes. Now, onto the other category, there are books that are more explosive. They have secret information that shows the member of the royal family not in such a good light because it exposes their flaws. And they're more often than not written when the person is already dead. Like we see the Mountbattens about their failed marriage, and also explosive things like the fact that Mountbatten liked little boys. Now, this is why Entitled does not fit to either category, because it is not a positive portrait of the Duke and Duchess of York, but it's also not an expose after they have passed away. On the contrary, it's an expose about two people that are young enough to be held accountable for their mistakes. And also, it exposes, unlike all of these other books, actual numbers and figures that affect the average British person today. It is worth noting that just because a book portrays a member of the royal family in a positive light and can be used as a piece of pro-royal propaganda, it doesn't necessarily mean it is a bad thing, because oftentimes it gives us a chance to hear their side of the story. But this book here is a clear example of propaganda, where when you first read this, the idea you have is that Sarah was a victim. She published this book in the 90s to clear up her name after the divorce. So of course, you're far more likely to see a piece of propaganda to the left than you are to the right, where books tend to be far more honest, especially because the person that is written about is already dead. So this is not the first book that Andrew Loney publishes on members of the royal family. He also wrote The Mountbattens and Traitor King, two excellent books that I highly recommend. So now on to the review. There are 4 topics I think that Andrew made an excellent case on this book and I want to mention about it. The first one is the excessive use of taxpayer money. So in several pages here, Andrew goes as far as giving us figures about how much money was being wasted by both Andrew and Sarah. We see here that Sarah not only was wasting money with things like hiring psychics, but also she had annual expenditure that was quite high and usually included things that were completely useless, like fancy handbags and hiring chefs to cook expensive meals and then last minute tell them, no, I no longer want to eat this. For example, on page 127, it says that she spent £100,000 on clothes, £25,000 in an hour spending spree in Bloomingdale's. And let's remember, this is in the 1990s, so with inflation, these figures go way through the roof. Andrew was no better because he was spending dozens of thousands of pounds just for luxury golf trips where he would take private jets and the most expensive of everything. So yeah, one of the main points is this expose that both Andrew and Sarah were consciously making use of taxpayer money to fund their lavish lifestyles, doing very minimal work. And the fact that oftentimes Andrew was used as a kind of envoy to represent British interests, but instead he just ended up being rude and obnoxious, thus not only harming the image of the royal family, but harming Britain's image abroad. The second point that Andrew exposes here very well is the Epstein scandal and how not only Prince Andrew but Fergie were very good friends with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but the fact that they brought them. So Andrew brought Epstein and Ghislaine not only to Balmoral, but also Sandringham and Windsor and God knows how many other places that he had access to. And this had been going on for years. And just now we know that there is a book written by Virginia Giuffre, which was one of the victims by Prince Andrew. And this book promises to be very explosive as well. I have already bought it, it's on the way, and as soon as I read it, I'll be making a review as well. Now, the third thing I think that is very interesting that Andrew Loney spoke about on Entitled is he gave a lot of background information on the early days of both Prince Andrew and Fergie. Because of this, it was easier for us to understand why they were so messed up in adulthood. One thing very interesting that he mentioned is how Prince Andrew was obsessed with teddy bears. This was a phenomenon that was observed with his great-uncle, actually, Edward VIII. This, of course, we know stems from the fact that they probably were emotionally neglected as children, and Andrew was incredibly spoiled by the Queen. We all know that. That's one of the reasons why his behavior was so entitled. And one thing that, even though I have read and watched countless documentaries and books about members of the royal family, one thing I did not know that Andrew Loney exposes in Entitled is that the King's father, so Prince Philip, was having an affair with Sarah Ferguson's mother. How can we expect some sense of normalcy from a family that is this problematic at times? And to be honest, I do feel sorry for the king, Charles. Charles actually spent a long time learning about different cultures. He even published a few books himself. Some of his books I have here. He's the most cultural king we've ever had. So personally, I like him. But let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts about the current king? And that leads me to the last point I want to mention, that this is the first time I have ever seen a British historian exposing the late Queen Elizabeth II as not as flawless as people thought she was. Because he reveals in Entitled that she was aware of the shenanigans done by Andrew and she done nothing about it. Even the Secret Service informing her and asking her to intervene, but she refused to stop Andrew simply because he was her favorite son. So with that, we can see that perhaps the late Queen wasn't that concerned with the British public's interest as people think that she was, simply because she never voiced her opinions in public. Now, there are many other excellent things that Andrew Loney exposes in Entitled, but I do urge you to buy it for yourself and read it because it is an excellent, excellent read. As you can see here, I marked some of the pages with information that I thought was quite interesting. I'm going to leave the link for you to buy this book on the description of this video. And to me, this is a revolutionary piece of work. This is a game changer and it's going to change the whole thing, because now not only has this book pushed for members of the royal family to be held accountable for the things they do wrong, but also open investigation on the misuse of taxpayer money, pushed for Andrew and Fergie to relinquish their titles as Duke and Duchess of York, is pushing for Prince William to take a stand for the future and change the monarchy once he becomes king, is putting pressure on the current king about this, because there are many people that are wanting Andrew to lose more benefits and more titles because he still lives a very luxurious life. And as I mentioned, not only that, but this book asks for more transparency when it comes to the Foreign Office, something incredibly important for British historians. So yeah, I definitely recommend. I look forward to making more book reviews. Let me know in the comments of this video if this is the kind of content that you enjoy. And as I said, as a royalist myself, I have studied a lot about members of the royal family, so this is something that I'm really interested on, and I do hope to make more content in the future. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to comment below your opinion on this book and on everything I spoke about here, and I wish you all a great day.